Hey, this is Jaryd Krause, host of the Buying Online Businesses podcast. And in this episode, I'm talking with Jeff Coyle, who's the co-founder and the chief revenue officer at MarketMuse. And this is such a great episode. With Jeff, we speak about how to buy specific content website businesses and also how to scale these content websites. So specifically, Jeff and I talk about how to find the opportunity for growth when we're buying these website businesses and what sort of questions we need to be asking the seller or the broker when we're buying these websites to see if there's still opportunity left on the table and different ways that we can scale these types of businesses. We also talk about like how and why your content should be accessible for all users. And we talk about user experience quite heavily in this episode. We talk about creating content for your audience content your audience actually wants to consume. And we work out and talk about how to find out what that content is, like what sort of content should you be providing to them. We also dive into why you should never dumb down your content or only produce high level content, because you should have something for all maturity levels of users for your site. And there's so much more we dive into. It's such an incredible episode. And if you are looking to buy a website business and grow one, you're going to love this episode. Now, before we get stuck into this episode, we talk a lot about buying websites. And I don't want you to go away and buy yourself a lemon, which is why I have my due diligence framework 2.0 for you, which is an opt-in. You can go away to my website at buyingonlinebusinesses.com/free resources to get this. And there's a bunch of questions that you can ask the seller, everything you need to ensure that you're doing good due diligences in that due diligence framework. So go to my free resources tab on my website and get that yourself. Now let's get stuck into the episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bob podcast. It's great to have you here, and thank you, Jeff, for coming on from MarketMuse. I'm looking forward to this one.
Hi, thank you for joining me. It's one of my favorite podcasts, so I'm glad to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. So we're just chatting briefly, and you have been in the M&A space prior to jumping in with MarketMuse, which is quite exciting. I know a lot of people listening are like, wow, okay, how can we relate what happens in the M&A space with these bigger brick and mortar type businesses and related to sites and stuff like that? A lot of people looking at buying content sites, which you gratefully help a lot of people with. So what are some of the things that you kind of like learned through that experience of being in that M&A role that, is pretty important when you're looking at buying, a website business?
Yeah, so the 2-minute story that tracks back is I've been in this space, content strategy, search engine optimization, site portfolio management since 99, 2000, as scary as that sounds. And I was I was an early employee at a company that was sold in 2009 to a competitor. And I stayed with that competitor for a number of years, where I managed traffic, search, and engagement. And one of those components was evaluating potential acquisitions, roll-up acquisitions, fold-in acquisitions, major acquisitions, however you want to call it, basically. The big piece of that was evaluating the asset or the sites that were part of the purchase. There may have been other products. There may have been revenue line items that were not just ad RPM. It was, a particular subscriber base or a list of users had value and their recurring value. So we had to take into account the list that was being purchased, the value of those users, as well as the site and the site upside. And I think for this audience, primarily, it's that math and how that kind of ties kind of to how a lot of how MarketMuse came to be. Some of the pieces of MarketMuse came to be is, how do you research a site and evaluate its strengths, its weaknesses, its gaps, where the opportunities are, but also look at the technical failures, technical problems, and almost doing forensic audits for failed migrations of the past, or for changes in content cadence, or for authors that left, and maybe that led to a degradation of quality. So we were doing manual evaluations. It sounds so painful now, because now I
Yeah.
even for the site level now, and I can get into that in a little bit, but manual evaluations and trying to predict, if we did this many motions of adjustment, if we did this much optimization work, if we smushed the site down, if we combined these two sites, if we created content at this particular cadence and this particular speed, we built, like we were trying to figure out manually how to predict the upside potential. And I think that applies heavily to buying sites today. It's you want to find those sites that had some level of mismanagement, but it didn't impact their ability to perform. It's stuff that, I'll give you one fun example. Identifying a site that had links from Tim Berners-Lee, the w3.org that had been 404ing for 6 years. Okay, like stuff like that. Like you have to do the forensic audit, and that's a real story. And or a failed migration. You see that, oh gosh, this used to be a PHP site, the migration wasn't right. We can predict if you fix that, what that upside is. The site owner doesn't know that. And so you're able to price it at current state and know the upside of all these improvements and what that's going to yield. And that's part of what, is my forte, is finding those diamonds. And I talk to website buyers all the time that have kind of hybrids of this process, and they're looking for that, they're looking for that
all-in-one solution. Yeah. Because there's so many people get into this from skew-if angles of like, all right, I'm going to start a content site or I'm going to buy a content site, and they learn from, say, somebody in one space and they teach them this method and, go down the keyword research and go down this thing. And then, as you form over the years, you build this thing together, but you guys have the all-in-one solution, which is why I'm so excited to dig into MarketMuse and what you guys do there. And I think what's fascinating about the M&A space, just to go back to that, is that you're really like, when you're looking at purchasing these businesses and helping people through that M&A phase of the purchase, you're really looking at like how valuable that list is and how valuable that business is. And feel like a lot of people especially in the content space, don't know how, or don't really put much merit and much value in like an email list, and forget that when we're buying a website, like if it has an email list, ask, how many, not just emails or subscribers there are, but how many active subscribers, and then how many, like what's the open rates. And if you have pushed, content to them, such as affiliate links, what's like the success rate? What's the close rate of that? I feel that's just missed out. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, it's a huge miss. And you look at a site that, for example, how did they acquire those subscribers? You've got to go back and say, what was the mechanism? Was it a really, really low conversion, banner, or a static persistent head bar, and they haven't done any content upgrades? They haven't done any free info products ever, right? And so you can look at historical. I acquired users at this rate with these mechanisms, with these promos. So even going in reverse that way is very important. You're not just looking at the value of the list and their current engagement, but how big could that list have been? And now I know what my velocity can be of acquiring new users with better tactics. And so I look at that as well, but also like engagement rates on social, engagement rates, if there is any community components or support community components. I'm looking at all of those things too. Was part of an acquisition of one of the largest networks of consumer electronics, as far as I can get into, but their community was the most powerful. And being able to look at user generated content, UGC pools of content that don't have much existing monetization, but seeing the authority in those forums or those communities, and then being able to go write editorial content.
There's so much left on the table, right? Like if you've got this audience that's like highly engaged, but hasn't been monetized, or not even just like, I hate the word like monetize, but I'm more about like hasn't been shared how much value can be offered, which can be, values in direct proportion to monetize, but they just haven't gotten that next step of like, how can I help you further? And that's the juicy part of an acquisition.
You haven't turned those people into brand ambassadors. You haven't turned those people into people who can drive business value for you, and they want to in a lot of cases. It's and what you get typically when you're profiling a business like that is Web traffic, $15 RPM. Forum traffic, $2.49, $2.49. But it's like 900,000. Then you're like, okay, and that's all you get. They're not giving you the true potential. So that get devalued products like that, and the devalued sections, to me, that's the goal. I mean, when I find something like that, I'm like, oh no, I can turn powerful forum into a publishing strategy, and that publishing strategy has predictable yield, and so that's where the upside is. I mean, you could take any thriving forum that's not monetized and turn it into a content gold mine, a solution like MarketMuse, or just figuring it out,
Yeah, just like indexing things and pushing people into the right positions, and just going like, hey, what do you actually need more than anything, and give it to them. Like, just that's all it is.
It's also the table of contents concept, right? Like, people, what they think of their site as like this thing and then another thing. They're not thinking about it like, what's the best experience that a user could have that wants to know about this concept that you can give them? Why don't you walk them through it? Give them great usability, driven process. It might cause them to read an editorial content item, as well as some repurposed threads of a forum, as well as some content upgrades. It doesn't have to be one way, and that's what I like to kind of revive. And sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's spot on. Like, for example, it's just making that content accessible for those people that don't, because you're like, a lot of content sites are just like, all right, I'm gonna punch out as much content as I possibly can and just keep my site updated because Google wants, our site updated. But that doesn't mean just producing more crappy content and having it just get lost in the back of your site. Instead, like, I'll give you an example. I got the developer to update my site just recently. I think it went live like 2 weeks ago. And there was my main podcast page. But when I scrolled to the bottom, I couldn't go away and access there might have been 10 podcasts on that page, but I couldn't access the other ones. And I'm like, what if people want to go through this, like my most popular post wasn't in the top 3 on the top. What if they want to go back all the way and listen to them and they just can't, it's not accessible. And I feel like a lot of content sites leave that out, right?
Oh yeah, it's painful. I mean, there's solutions, easy to access solutions out there that can find if we sadly we call it orphaning. If you've orphaned some posts and some pages, but I mean that doesn't even dive into rich media optimization, podcast optimization. I mean, there is pools of that. I mean, we have a thing we call the 7 planes of rich media optimization hell. Where are you? Do you just have your title? Do you have your show notes? Do you have your transcripts? How is your accessibility? Do you have a date sensitive archive that you were just describing? And then what's the next tier of stuff that you need to do to just jam it? I mean, we crush it for people who historically have thought their video and their podcasts and their webinars were, landing pages and behind paywalls, and that's it. Or behind, reg forms, or they were doing show notes, and that's it. I mean, there's so much you can do. It's just super exciting. But the date archives, they're the bane of a technical SEO's existence. It's like you're telling the search engines that page gets worse in importance over time, right? So
Yeah.
that's what you're telling them. And
yeah.
so, yes,
and Google sees like, all right, cool, this is no good. I'm not going to show you up in rankings. I'm going to send you less traffic. And it's like, no, this is like the worst thing I could do for my site.
I'll give you a fun anecdote. Imagine that on a site that had content since 1997, right? Like you talk about M&As, it's bringing back all these funny horror stories. But I had a date archive that had pages that were 36 levels deep. And we call them one-on-ones. They have one link from one page, one link from one page, one link from one route. So you got one link from one page, the paginated page 36. That's the only place you got to link to this page. Now, do you possibly think that's going to get traffic? So then the tail wags the dog. If you're the person who's monitoring the analytics, you think, oh, all this old content's to have. But it's really because it's all hidden. And so you actually start to create bias that old content's worse because of the structure of your site, or because you don't maintain it, or because you don't keep your clusters up to date, or because you don't update links. You publish new and you link back, but you never go back and update your links to point forward. I mean, these are the most common mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's what I look for when I'm trying to evaluate a site, right? If I'm trying to evaluate a site for upside, someone who never goes back and updates posts is the first thing I can.
Yeah, it's scary to think that what you said is like you've got these 36 pages linked to one another, and there's only like, I guess you can see it's like there's only one door, but to get to that door to that next piece of content, you got to go through this crazy maze to get there. And you're never gonna, like, the chances you finding that piece of content is zero, almost zero. So I guess maybe what we do, because we just, like, I think we're vibing quite well on like how important this is, but I think maybe we sort of share with the listeners what they can do differently to make that content more accessible. I'll give an example is, I mentioned podcasting or content. Like, you could have your top 3 to top 5 on your top page, or a start here button on the top of your nav bar, and then maybe a bit of a table of contents. What are some of the things that you would suggest somebody that's got a content site, that just bought a content site, and they're like, all right, I've got so much content here, Google is not valuing it, or people can't get to it, there's not enough doors. What would you say are some things that they could do?
I think you're really taking a librarian method, librarian and marketer at the same part in many large sites. So a couple of things I like to think about would be, if I had to restructure my site in both against the purchase cycle, or the knowledge cycle, or against clusters and topics, or a combination of the three. I know that sounds esoteric, but basically what I want to know is, I've got, what content do I have about this topic? And what content do I have on this topic against various stages of the buy cycle, or the maturity model, or the knowledge cycle? So what is my early stage awareness content about valuing a website? Do I have content for experts? Do I have content for novices? And early stage awareness. Now I want to make sure that I've got a place for somebody to land that is in that persona, and I want to be able to guide them through that purchase cycle with the collection of content, regardless of how old, regardless of how new it is. That naturally creates a cluster of content. That cluster of content can have a core anchor, or a pillar page, or a long form power page, which, depending on structures, that's a whole other discussion. I would want to make sure that I have clear wayfinding to all this stuff, and I can make that that can be triggered with conversion elements. It can have so many different components, but basically what I want to make sure, and then I can assess and say, where do I have gaps, and how do I fill those gaps short term while I build, or while I update? And if I do that motion against all of my core values and the core areas of expertise, I'm going to have a more logical structure. And I might see some stuff that I got lucky on. This is my favorite part, right? I can call it the arm, right? You got the arm. I'm making motions, but if you can't see me, it doesn't make. I gestate ridiculously, but gesticulate, not gestate. That's a terrible misstatement. But if you have content that gets a lot of traffic, right, and it has no foundation of any other content that's related to it, and it's just, for some reason, maybe it picked up a bunch of links, or no competition, or some reason is out there, you may either make the decision you need to build infrastructure around it, so that the day that it gets devalued, you're not dead. You got to build around it, or you decide, hey, this isn't all that important for the growth of the rest of my business. I'm just going to leave it out there. But you've got to make that, that content audit, that content inventory, to then get to a point where you can structure properly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's excellent. I guess, like you said, is just filling in the gaps, right? And then I think about the zoom out method, because sometimes we can be very macro, or sorry, very micro. And then we come out and we zoom out and we're quite macro, and think about, like, all right, people are coming to the website, and then, like, there's those gaps that are missing in content, and they could just leave. So me as a site owner, I'm not doing them the justice of giving them the best experience whilst on my site for the education or what they're trying to achieve. Would you say that's...
Exactly. It's so much. It's two things, right? So I think that the common misconception is that all external links are bad, first of all. And if they leave my site, that's bad, right? No, it's actually, in many cases, extremely good for not just search engine optimization reasons, which external links are a must if you are doing top flight best practice SEO. It's just people do them wrong, which I'm happy to get into. But the other thing is, if you point someone to something valuable and you can't maintain or manage that valuable external reference, that's the best you're going to do for the user's experience. If you point them to something not valuable and that you can't maintain and manage that experience, and it is adjacently or not directly head on, you're actually not doing the best you can do. And that's commonly a misstatement. But the keeping them in your site as much as possible where you can provide that great experience is absolutely the best practice. I mean, in 95% of the cases, and if you're using external links and you're linking to highly relevant or competitive content, relevant, it's a mess. I mean, and it happens. People think that they should link to extremely relevant content on the same topics that they're targeting with their pages. And it's basically saying, hey, there's a better version of this.
Yeah, or something else. This is the same spiel, but a different, in a different color.
I see it on awareness page content all the time. People write their favorite guide, and then for some reason, they'll link to Wikipedia's version. And I'm like, no, you don't want that, right? Link to something adjacently relevant that tells the story that you actually know what you're talking about, and you're making a great secondary reference. That's natural. That's logical, right? But don't link to, you're writing about content marketing. Don't link to the HubSpot what is content marketing page. Trust me, it's hurting me. We see it all the time. So I look for that too when I'm auditing sites, is external link dynamics. I'm like, if you use Screaming Frog or Sitefold, Screaming Frog gives you all this data.
And Link Whisperer, I think, as well.
Link Whisperer, absolutely.
We were talking about Spencer before, yeah.
External, we've got the recommendation side. We do it in a different way on our Connect offering, where we provide the existing cluster. And so you can see where you've got pages that should be interwoven, and then what your external linking recommendation should be. So that's where we differentiate with.
Oh, they did the external's great. That's awesome. I think when you come to internal, there's only so much that you've got on your own page, but when it comes to external, it's like, all right, there's the whole internet here that I need to try and work out what's the best link for that. So that's a huge value add.
You got an advanced audience, so I'll give you a meta example there.
Okay,
so
excellent.
This is fun. This is an advanced technique, right? So I always like to think of that as if I had access to both sites and I could write the other article and write mine, right? And I were trying to empower the other one, what would I link from this one? Or the other way around, if I had access to both sites and I could get the link, what words on that page would I send to mine? And so that's always the way that I think about it. If I had to do a external, what's the perfect place that I would give an adjacently relevant reference? And if I had control over both pages, and I think if you can keep that in your brain when you're doing this work, you won't mess up and get caught in like someone's dogma about link building, which maybe is or isn't true. So,
well, yeah, there's so many, like we could call them wives' tales or common myths. So a question about that control, like, would you say a good way to control that other, article that you may be linking to is to contact that page or that site and say, hey, I feel like you're missing this piece of content. Would you like me to write about it? And then you've got control over both.
I'm speaking in the kind of meta because there's so much nuance in here. Like if you actually had control over both, versus if you don't. But yeah, I mean, you do. You're trying to think about what is that publisher likely not to do? What are the articles they're likely not to write? But you are providing value. So if they never cover this adjacent topic, but it is adding value, that's going to be net new. I am, analyzing gaps and that kind of thing. One nuance there is, I forget who coined the phrase. It's like, is your content answering the user's next 5 questions. So one tactic is to answer those next 5 questions as well. And you should also write that comparable if you have the ability to. But your goal should always be to know what the next 5 questions in the buyer journey or the learning journey is, and also write that content. And if you lather, rinse, and repeat that, you're going to have a beautiful site that actually is written from the lens of a subject matter expert. And that's like, it works for an outreach part too. And that's about as deep as I can get into
this. Like you said, for everybody that's listening off air, we talked about, Jeff was like, there's so many things like I want to talk about that I can't. But there's some cool things that you can as well.
But stuff from the world of 20 years of or more of doing this, you hear it all, but like some of these things really work. And thinking about quality first and user first, it sounds trite, but it matters. It just like that kind of example. If I wasn't thinking that, then I'd be thinking how to like hustle it and
just try to optimize, get little bits of traffic and it's really about the user experience at the end of the day, isn't it? Like you said.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jeff, like we could just keep going down the rabbit holes on that, but I've got so many things that I want to ask you, and I guess let's talk about how you structure, the journey you take people through with MarketMuse as users. So, for example, like the research, like creating new content, for example. So, for somebody that's bought a site, they're like, all right, cool. There's some of the things that at the start of this episode that Jeff and Jaryd mentioned that we could do to make sure we can, uncover some hidden doors and things like that. But like, what if I want to create a good content marketing strategy? We've got research, the strategy creation, and then optimization. What are some of the things that people should be doing within their research when they're looking to create new content?
So yeah, in MarketMuse, so we have the ability for you to look at this at a very, very zoomed in level. So a page level audit, where do a gap analysis head to head against another page or against our golden model, our model, or what it would mean to write this article as if it was written by an expert on any topic. That's our core value. We're able to do that at the site level, but then at the page level, but also tune that up to a site view to see where do you have strong content, where do you have authority. We have the only in-market personalized difficulty score, so we can tell you how hard it is for you to perform, not just how hard is it to perform, which is the unique differentiated value of this. And so imagine if you have that, and that tells you how much money you're going to have to invest in content to create or update. Also giving you the ability to filter and see what pages have the biggest upside for optimization. So if you're going to update 10 pages, here's the 10. Build it right into a module in your dashboard and have that always on. The way that I like to think about it and goes into every time it's been a journey, 5 years plus of selling MarketMuse, right? The way I like to think about it is almost all plans except migrations and migration plans fit into these 4 dynamics. It's quick wins, right? It's risk avoidance, right? It's business goals, or I call it business requirements, because it's what are the things I can create that'll be surgical strikes in win. It's I want to own this topic. What do I need to do to actually achieve that goal? Then it's risk avoidance. It's, oh gosh, I have this page from 7 years ago and it's like 90% of my traffic. What do I do to fix that? Or I've got this article, it's kind of on its own. It's the only one in this space that gets any traffic. That's my risk assessment. Or I've got a tough competitor, usually I'll drop a few names of really tough competitors, but I won't today. But a big faceless entity bought this powerful site and just started publishing a lot of amazing content, and I'm scared. Or it's the business side where I have to take orders. So I have an editorial calendar. I want to put my best foot forward every time I publish. So I like to break down the value that we provide from a planning side is no matter who you are there, quick wins. I want to own this topic. I am scared about this competitor, or I just have to knock it out of the park with all the stuff that's already on my editorial calendar because all I do is take orders. Like, we got you covered. And we build content briefs at scale. So you can actually have the outlines built. by MarketMuse for you. So you have a single source of truth with your writer. So your writer isn't going to get this brief and write something that's completely out of bounds, and then you have a bunch of feedback cycles. They're not going to build something that's subpar. They're not going to write something that won't succeed if you have guardrails there. And then they don't have to do as much research. They just write and be creative and focus on production value, which is what I want them to be doing anyway, right? Why do I want someone who's an expert in a field who's amazing at writing narratives? Why would I want them doing
keyword research?
Keyword research.
Yeah.
And that's and then the migration side is you're gonna have a few other plans. You're gonna have a lot of repurposing, consolidation, gap plugging. You're gonna have some steps there. Then when you're buying a new site, it feels a lot like a migration. But those other plan dynamics, it's quick wins, risk avoidance, business goals, and then requirements of my business. Those are the ways that I like to think about how we accelerate, and it's all stages of that process we try to build, and then we have a new way you can order content.
Awesome, man. And so say somebody bought a site and they're like, all right, cool, there's some low hanging fruits here. I want to get some quick wins on the board to try and get, my multiple back as soon as possible. That's what every investor's thinking about. Like, how do I get my ROI back ASAP? What would you say, 2 to 3, the most common quick wins would be for a site that's just been purchased, say a content site?
I'm going to tell you the answer, and then I'll also tell you it's built into the promo on MarketMuse Pro right now.
I've seen that promo. It's the first 3 months. Yeah.
No, it's 1 month, but it's called the challenge. It's the new promo. But the first things you should be doing are, I'll give you 3, right? One of them is if I've got extremely powerful, authoritative pages, I want to be looking at alternative variants or user intent profiles that I'm not doing so well at. And I want to write those articles. So I'm crushing it with some, quote unquote head terms or some, really strong stuff. Well, what are the variants that haven't been approached? What are the questions that haven't been answered with that page or those pages? What are the user groups or the stages in the buy cycle that haven't been filled? I go write them. I have a weighted back because I've already got the anchor.
So that's like creating a strategy, right? Of like what content to create next.
Yep, exactly right. Yeah. The other one is updating low quality content. So evaluating content that punches above its weight. It gets more traffic than it deserves. It's low quality, but it gets a lot of traffic, right? You may be hamstrung with let's say you don't have a lot of software at your disposal. Let's say you don't have MarketMuse.
So you don't have MarketMuse.
And you're kind of stuck with looking at striking distance keywords, right? And you're looking at, rankings of 8 through 15, let's just say. That's the age-old striking distance trick of the SEO is you send someone an email and says, hey, you should rank better for this word. The method behind that madness is if you improve the quality of the content on those pages, make it cover more related concepts, you have more depth, and also potentially integrate it with the rest of the site. Those are going to be your instant quick wins. Creating those, it's called variant targeting, what I was just talking about, and then striking distance analysis are 2 easy wins. I'll leave it at that because that's basically like guaranteed win every time with the site, and you can always find those. The sites you want to watch out for, right, are that might not have as much upside is where someone's done a really, really tuned job with a small inventory. So they've kept the inventory small and they focused heavy on link development, and they don't have them as much creep. They don't have as much noise. Those are going to be a little bit more difficult, a lot more creation, a lot less optimization is going to be needed. Or let's say they have a beacon page, which is completely misaligned. I have a fun story where I was evaluating a site that was about a language translation site, and they had 90% of the traffic went to one page, and it wasn't about language translation.
Oh, wow.
So
what was the bounce rate on that?
And so it was like, I looked at it and I was like, sorry, I'm about to tell you that your baby's ugly, and how am I going to be elegantly? But when you see something like that, you got to be careful too, because it's not just that the page is old, right? Sometimes they're like, it's a bunch of old stuff, but sometimes it's actually because it's like you're gonna have to do a lot of work to bridge that. Like we did bridge it, and it ended up working in this case, and that's another technique. But It's kind of like 6 degrees of separation with content, bridging. You can do it, but it's just a lot more work. So if you want quick wins are low, crappy content items that you can fix up and they're going to win. That's the best. That's free money. And if you're buying a business from somebody who is a single owner blogger, they rarely go back and update content. So even the idea of touching their art is going to feel gross. They probably haven't done it. You're going to go touch the art.
Yeah, man. And this is the thing that I feel that a lot of people don't really, when they're looking at buying sites, they don't see the value in, like, okay, this person has a blog and they've written, one post per week. Like most people think is the right thing to do. That's not the right thing to do, especially in 2020 and probably in beyond. But they've got the site that they say, okay, cool. It's been around for like 4 years, one post every single week. And it's like, there's so much, like the amount of energy that can go into one post per week isn't sufficient to make it good enough for traffic to actually find value in each of those posts, right? So there's so much optimization that can happen just within that.
And then you'll see so many of these like situations where there's additional value that just hasn't been harnessed. I had a site where the person who was the blogger, I acquired this site. The person who was the blogger had a 200-page book. None of that content was on the web. All right. They had, yeah, I know, it's great. They had a 200-page book of, by the way, of stuff that was so parcelable. And they had imagery in unoptimized slideshows, right? They had podcasts with title and 3 bullet show notes. And that deal was sold on the basis of the traffic. And the traffic was 2,600 entrances a month. So it was not a big deal, but we're able to take that to, 50 to 60x traffic.
Oh, mate, that's a great deal. Like just in the podcast alone, all you have to do is hire a VA to do some show notes, not just show notes that you're probably like your head's going like, please don't just do the regular old show notes of transcription, but like, some good show notes that like aren't just 3 bullet points, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Great transcription, annotation of the transcription, make sure it interweaves with the rest of the content on your site. You're filling in gaps. See, our conversation misses things. This is one of my fun tricks, right? Our conversation, we're not going to cover everything. No one's saying you can't go into your transcript and add commentary.
Yeah. Just like say pause and, hey, like this person was talking about this and here's a bit of an explanation on why you should do this way that we didn't get to talk about because we missed it in the podcast.
Exactly right. Or maybe put another video right there of you talking about that and just you. There's so much you can do. And we say so many words when we're talking. I say way more because I talk too much. But, we say there's, 3,000 words for, I don't even know what the equivalent is, but there's a crazy math equation. If you're not harnessing all of the potential when you're looking at deals, if you're only looking at that traffic number, you're just shortchanging your upside. I mean, sometimes you have to do a lot of work. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of work, but there is, these things are still out there. I mean, even big publishers have such under-optimized sites. And sometimes they have to just sell off these assets. Sometimes they have to just dump these sites.
Or delete posts and stuff.
Sometimes they dump them and let them go for a song.
They're the ones we want. But like, I want to ask you about, optimizing, content and video, because, a lot of content, like a lot of people are happy to hide behind their website and hide behind the screen and just write content. What's your take on video and embedding, say, even YouTube videos, or embedding audio into just a regular old affiliate site or a great content site? What's your take on that in terms of making that content better?
I think you need to understand your channel performance really well. You also realize how much work you can actually do. Some stuff on even MarketMuse, we don't have as ideally optimized as we could, just because you pick your battles. Depending on the size of your team, you got to be realistic about how much you can actually get done.
Yes, focus is important.
Yeah, so important. And with video, audio, webinar, screen, slide share, whatever it is, I think you do always have to commit to at least annotation and transcription, no matter what. You have to commit to at least that to be even worth doing. The next level is you have to try to treat it like gated content, I think, in some cases, because it is rich media. Not that you're gating it, but you can provide a lot of reasons to point to that asset. So if I've got a webinar or if I've got this discussion, like how many different audiences would love to listen to this podcast? At least
It's
two,
very,
right?
very, yeah.
So why
It's
do we
quite
only have
variable.
one landing page,
Mm.
right? And so I like to commit to access points and the meets minimum for translation. And that really drives me to be able to, as long as I can support that, then I'm willing to do it. Obviously you want to do at least meets minimum on all your markup and those types of things. But I don't really hesitate to cross post rich media.
Yeah, excellent. You know what I think is important, and this is just a little bit to explain. Like this is what I do in our community with helping people, grow their content a little bit and grow their site. Is that you know you can optimize your content, but if you're going to put video in front, like spend all this time with video production and all that sort of stuff, when the person's more likely to be content with just reading, then that can be a waste. And I really feel like it's so important that people should kind of find out how their audience likes to and prefers to consume their content, because some people aren't like happy to do video or aren't happy to read out a post. And that could be okay, because you've got these people that are just readers. Like, I don't want to listen to your voice. I just want to read. Like I hate readings personally, but
Yeah, I mean, I would so much rather listen to this than comb through. But when I have something I need to reference, I will make a mental note and I will go back to document the reference all the time. I mean, if you don't have a heat map software on your site, you're losing it. I mean, you can't, even if you're using a basic heat mapper like a Hotjar, you know, why would you not? It's practically free. And you can get insights. Maybe you don't even know the user experience on mobile, like the real user experience that's actually happening. I don't consider user experience. By the way, my background's in usability theory, search engine design. I have computer science stuff. I have a background in those two specializations. And the user experience is look at the pages people land on and look at them on the device. If you don't do that and you're not watching people do it, complete miss. I mean, I'm a believer in that we use a solution called Full Story. It's very expensive, but you got to have it. So even like something like Hotjar, I mean, or something where you can see like almost like a DVR of the experience. That's when you really learn what's going on. And sometimes you'll look at that and you'll cry a lot. I often ask people who are buying sites, do those technologies exist on the site? Ask the owner if they'll let you put that on the site for a couple of weeks. Sometimes they'll say no, but hey, it's worth asking, because then you can really get a true sense of who that audience is and what they're doing. I mean, the log files and analytics wise.
yeah, just that feedback. I forget how important feedback is. Like, I actually ask my clients for negative feedback. I'm like, just give me the positive's good. It's good for my ego, but I don't want to build my ego. I want to build my business to be better. So give me the negative feedback. And somebody gave me some great feedback on one of my podcasts, and I was just like, that is awesome. And they were hesitant to do so. But that feedback is just so, so important. And you could find that negative feedback on those heat maps. Like, hey, I'm spending all my time creating video when people aren't consuming it anyway, or I'm spending all my time optimizing this post for mobile or for desktop, but people are consuming it on mobile and it looks ugly on mobile.
I mean, I love it. I just wrote it down. I don't want to build my ego. I want to build my business. That sounds like a book. You're gonna write it first, or am I? I know. But no, that's an awesome line, and it's really, that is hard. I mean, it's very hard because, I mean, I manage product or product data science and engineering and marketing for MarketMuse, you do get feedback. And you have to, when you're a product owner, you design, you manage product, you get good feedback and you get bad feedback. And you get feedback from people who don't understand product and they can't map it to what we call product maturity, right? So this is a known use case that everybody understands, and thus it is in maturity. So it is degrading in value, right? Everyone gets that. Okay. A human's natural feeling on that is that that's the thing that everything should be. It's the thing that they understand. And that is degrading value. Use cases that are earlier in maturity are often to the masses harder to learn and harder to pick up. But taking feedback that is bad and taking that in without mapping it to product maturity is very, that's the world, that's my world. So you sometimes have to take feedback on your site usability. You know, I am bringing this back to something and tie it to the level of maturity of your user. So the person that has no idea where to start when they're buying a business, they've got to have a path on your site. Just like somebody who is their first day in a software product, they're going through like the most basic use cases and onboarding, and let them fast track themselves into the advancement. Dumb down your product and don't dumb down your website to the lowest common denominator, because that then has less value because that's a mature user case or a mature reading experience. And that's the most, I mean, from a usability side, I know that's super esoteric, but hopefully it made sense. Don't dumb it down.
Yeah.
Don't dumb it down.
Absolutely love, the mature, like what the keywords that you said with the maturity of your users. And there's different, they're in different seats at different times in their journey. So like, I think if you go, dumbing it down, then you're only going to fit a certain demographic. And then if you go too high advanced, then you can't help the beginners either. And I think that you've just mentioned that perfectly. I think we're going to have to end on that note, unfortunately.
All right. I like it.
But yeah, like that was an awesome conversation, and I'd love to have you on again if you're open to it. But where can people find out more about you? I've got links to MarketMuse and lots of other things that we'll put in the show notes. But if people want to find out more about what you're doing, more about MarketMuse and what's going on.
So we have a Slack community called the Content Strategy Collective, which is for people who care about search and search engine optimization and content strategy and how those worlds weave together. You can always find me on there. I'm always accessible, DM even accessible in there. So please go check that out. If you want a link, just email me, jeff@marketmuse.com, or
I'm in there as well, actually.
Cool.
So, and you might get a bunch of influx after people listening to this.
I like hearing that. I think we just passed 900 or so in there. So on Twitter, it's typically about 90% content strategy and SEO, 10%, what beer I'm drinking, beyond that. And then, MarketMuse, we do a content strategy webinar series, typically about 2 a month, where we get into fireside chats, conversations just like this with someone from a content space that's maybe a little bit different than you might be thinking. Like we just did one on sales enablement with the head of the CMO for Socio and the founder of Vengresso, which is a sales training and a social platform. So we're always looking to say, like, how are different people in different roles thinking about content, and we try to get like a different type of person for each one. I'm doing one with Paul Rotzer tomorrow about AI and implications of AI, because we are launching a natural language generation product called First Draft, and it is in its alpha state. But you can order generated content. Our proprietary platform, it isn't publicly available platform. You can order that through our platform now at scale. So we're talking about AI and implications of AI and content and all that fun stuff tomorrow. I've usually got at least 4 webinars every month and they're always about different topics. So I don't reuse a lot.
That's an awesome topic in itself, like AI written content that can be better than a human being and can solve problems better than, say, myself. Kind of comes back to, I don't want to build my ego, I want to build my business. And if AI can do that, hey, like
I'm using that line.
might be the team's snippet as well for this podcast. Look, guys, thanks so much, Jeff, for coming on. Everybody that has listened, thanks so much for listening to the episode. Before we go, though, I want those listeners, if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, this is very, very powerful for myself. And if you can think of it, like 2 to 3 people that are content site owners are wanting to buy a content site, do them a massive favor and share this episode with them so they can learn what they need to be doing to grow their content site sustainably as well. So thanks, guys, for listening, and I'll speak to you on the next one.